Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. So today's video is gonna be the part 2 of my previous video about Spring MVC framework. So if you are new to my channel, first I would recommend you to go through that part of my video, link in the description below, and then see this video for a much more clearer picture about Spring MVC framework. In today's video, I'm going to discuss about how you can create a web application using Java configuration in Spring MVC. And also, I'll be going to get into much more details and in-depth about all those classes that are getting involved when you are creating one web application using Java configuration in Spring MVC. So, let's go. Okay, so now we will be understanding that how this XML configuration can be mapped to a Java configuration and how this Java configuration is making our life easier. Because if you see the XML files, sometimes it will be quite difficult to understand these mappings and all, right? So let us get into it. Okay, I'll be going file by file to make you understand it, and it will be able to discriminate as well. Okay, so now first, web.xml was our first file. In case of XML configuration, it was the first file which is coming into picture as it has a dispatcher servlet. So instead of this web.xml, we'll be having a file called app-config. Any name you can give to this file. The main point is you have to extend one of these annotation config dispatcher servlet initializer, which is provided by your Spring framework. See, I have hovered on it, and it has been provided that this is the base class of web application initializer. See, if you browse Spring MVC basic framework or a Hello World project in Google, you will be able to get that there are many places where they have used this web application initializer. So instead of this file, they are extending web application initializer, this one. Okay, so so what it does exactly, this abstract annotation config dispatcher servlet initializer, this file, this implementation actually, see, this is given that this registers a dispatcher servlet configured with annotated class, example Spring's @configuration classes. Means that the way you have already externally written like a dispatcher servlet, or mentioning a dispatcher servlet, right, in your web.xml. Then by seeing this servlet mapping, it will be searching for a similar kind name of file, and then it will be going to the Spring dispatcher servlet.xml. But if you see this app-config.java, there is nowhere we have been mentioning any dispatcher servlet except extending this file. So this will register one dispatcher servlet towards that particular Spring configuration file, which is annotated with @configuration. And whenever you are extending this class, abstract annotation config dispatcher servlet initializer, you have to give a implementation to all those abstract methods inside it. Get root config class, get servlet config classes, get servlet mappings. But if you actually concentrate here, see, there is no difference between these methods and what we have written in web.xml. How? See, here in app config, when you are writing this get root config classes, this get root config classes, see the written here, see the Spring doc here, specify the @configuration or @component classes to be provided to the root application context, right? Which means that this particular get root config classes will be, you should give all those classes name inside this return, whichever classes will be part of the root application context, okay, or which will be actual application specific, which you can say part of the filter, which is not coming into picture while the dispatcher servlet will be executing. So all those files, suppose for example you have a security configuration, which will be a singleton bean throughout your application, one bean throughout your application, or a data source configuration, which will be only singleton bean throughout your application. So those things will be your actual application specific, right? So your root application specific. And when you are providing all those classes here, those will be registered. Those particular class will be registered in your root configuration. And here this get root config classes will be creating one application context. This comes into picture, right? When we are talking about Spring MVC, two type of context will be coming into picture. First, application context. So this get root config classes, whichever classes you are registering inside it, like this. See, suppose if I had some security file, some security class configuration. So I have to put it here, security config. Okay. Similarly, if I have a database configuration file, that way I'll be putting like this, data source config dot class. So at the time of starting up or booting up the application, first it will be creating these files. First it will be creating the beans of these files, and these files must be annotated with @configuration. See, if you hover on it, it is saying that specify @configuration or @component classes to be provided, because it will be creating those classes being in the root application context itself. And it will be creating one application context instance which will be holding all the beans of these classes. Okay, so this is just for your understanding. Now let's come into the second one, get servlet config classes. See, as per the doc, it is saying that you have to provide again all those classes which will be annotated with @configuration or @component. Okay, but here the classes need to be provided which are more dispatcher servlet specific. What are those? Like dispatcher servlet will be talking to handler mapper, internal resource view resolver, all these kind of file, right? So that particular file which will be having or annotated with configuration and will be having your view resolver or handler mapper, that particular file you have to provide in get servlet config classes, like the way I did. Because what it does is, this will register the dispatcher servlet with this spring config.class. Okay, it will register the dispatcher servlet with this. And also one more thing to remember here, that as I said that get root config classes, this method will be creating one application context instance under which all the classes that you will be providing here, all the beans of those classes will be stayed in that application context instance. Similarly, get servlet config classes, this method will be creating one web application context instance inside which all the classes that you are providing here, those beans will be available. Okay, and this web application context which this get servlet config classes is creating, this is nothing but one child context, and the application context that your get root config classes is creating, this is a parent context. So parent, and we are creating in this way so that all the beans or classes which are dispatcher servlet specific will be able to extend or utilize all the beans that are provided in our get root config classes, right? Because it is possible that one of your controller is using those data sources, one of your other services class is using those data sources, right? So, or some security related configuration is getting used inside one controller, so that before going to that controller, it should be filtered through that security configuration. So actually your controller is using, or your classes which has been provided inside get servlet config classes is using the parent context classes configuration, or those security configuration classes configuration, or data source configuration classes configuration inside their own class, right? So that is how this get root config classes is aligned to your parent context, which means our application context instance, okay, which actually provides you the root application context related beans classes, and get servlet config classes actually aligned to those particular beans which needs to be provided for your dispatcher servlet application context, which is actually creating your child context or web application context instance. Okay, now the third part of it, which means this slash. See, this slash is nothing but the way that we have given this URL pattern slash, right? Means whichever request is coming to your application, that should first come to your web.xml, or in Java configuration it should come to your app config. So whichever comes here first, it will create the root application context, then it will go to your, then it will create the child context, or it will go to your those beans or classes which are specific to dispatcher servlet. So then it will be coming into this Spring config, where you have provided your view resolver. Here I am using again internal resource view resolver. If you want to compare these two, this Spring config.java is a replacement of Spring dispatcher servlet.xml. Okay, so now let us understand how this difference. As I have already told you, if you don't even mention this handler mapping, this will be provided by your Spring framework by default. So you don't need to worry about that. But as it is a MVC framework, so when we are coming into a Java configuration or into a annotation based MVC framework, so the configuration file must have this @enable web MVC. What it does, it is actually enabling the MVC configuration. It is telling that yes, this configuration, it has to read it and all the beans that it has to create it. Okay, so this is enabling web MVC, so that all the @configuration or @controller, these kind of annotation will work. Okay, so now @component scan, as I've already told before as well in my previous videos, that this is nothing but to scan all the beans or instances that has been created, or all those classes which are annotated with @component, @controller, @services, @repository, all those annotations. So it will scan those files and it will tell, like it will be telling the the container, the Spring container, that yes, these are the component files that needs to be for those the bean needs to be created. Okay, so now, so three things: configuration, to understand that yes, this is the configuration file, so that app config, after app config, dispatcher servlet will be coming through this method invocation. It will be coming to this Spring config. So all those internal resource view resolver or handler mapper will be inside this particular class. Okay, now second is @enable web MVC, so that it will be able to take those annotation based, it will be able to understand those annotation based Spring MVC that you have written the whole project. It will be able to understand those annotations. Okay, now the third thing is component scan, to just scan all those files which will be annotated with any of the @component or @controller or any of those type of annotation for which beans need to be created. Okay, now we are creating a bean which is for view resolver. So if we compare, here we are writing like this, right? That view resolver, internal resource view resolver, and we are giving a prefix and suffix here. So in using Java code, if you see this, see, we will be creating one object of this internal resource view resolver, then setting the view class, JSTL view. This actually helps to create the view. JSTL view is nothing but a, you see here only it is written that it is an internal resource view for JSTL pages. JSTL pages means JSP standard tag library. So it will be creating that, it will be helping you to create some JSP file or UI like JSP related files. Okay, so using this library, what you are doing is you are creating the whole path for a JSP file. Prefix will be web-inf views. If you see the page here, see what we have done is we have created this web-inf views and .jsp. Let me open this. Okay, see here I have created that home.jsp. What is the path? Inside our class path, then we have web-inf views, then home.jsp. Okay, so that is why in Spring config also I have given web-inf views. What is the suffix? .jsp, and that is how it is creating the whole address of a JSP file using that JSP tag library or JSTL view.class. Okay, now the home controller will be almost similar to it except few changes. First thing, as I have already told you, previously when we are not using @controller annotation or we don't have it, so what we did is previously what we used to do is using or extending those abstract controller like we did in this hello controller, right? Which we are doing it in using XML configuration. But in home controller here where we are using the Java configuration, we have annotated it with @controller. Okay, now the way that we have given, you remember, right, in Spring dispatcher.xml we have given the URL where we have given the URI pattern basically, using which it will be able to understand that it has to come towards hello controller. So instead of this, in home controller itself we are providing @request mapping along with that particular URI pattern, so that after app config dispatcher servlet will be going to the Spring config. Then post that whenever it is getting that URL or that request along with this pattern, first it will be coming to this home controller using, like, it obviously it will be knowing, right? Okay, now let me tell you that how this flow works in this case of Java configuration. Suppose your request come towards your dispatcher servlet. Now the dispatcher servlet will know all those beans which are inside your this compile series my project, and now this home controller inside that particular path only. So this classes bean will be created by that time. So that is why it will be checking all those components which are annotated with @controller whether they have this URI pattern or not, right? Because handler mapper will be telling it, which we didn't provide in case of our Java configuration. We are using by the what Spring framework is giving us by default. So handler mapper must have already told dispatcher servlet that yes, this is the URL. So for that we have to give, in case of annotation based Java configuration Spring MVC application, we have to provide this @request mapping. If you hover on it, see it is saying annotation for mapping web request onto specific handler classes. So whenever a request with this URI pattern is coming to your application, your dispatcher servlet will be asking handler mapper and your handler mapper will be telling your dispatcher config that this home controller will have that API or handler method which can process your request and provide you the model data that you are looking for. Okay, so similar way the rest of the method is same. If you see protected model and view, this I have already told you, right, how this model and view is working and how we are providing this name of the view which is home.page in this particular project, in this Java configuration project, and the similar kind of message we are providing here. Okay, So let me remove all the previous ones and we will be seeing only the Java based configuration. So we need these 4 files mainly: app config instead of web.xml, spring config.java instead of spring dispatcher solid.xml, home controller.java we already have. The only difference is there we are not using the annotation, here we are using the annotation. And the fourth one is home.jsp. Okay, the JSP file that you need to provide to render your data and show it to the user. Okay, now let me run it here. I'm running it. Okay, let me stop the previous one. Okay, here one thing to mention. Suppose previous one was running, and in that scenario only, in that situation only, I have ran this one also. In that particular scenario, it will be telling you that Tomcat server is already running into 8080 and it won't be able to run it here. Okay, so that is why I didn't run it. So let me run it, because whenever you are running an application into your local, and if you are using Tomcat server, then it will be by default always will be running 8080 port only. You can change it. I will come into it, all those things in some next videos. Okay, so okay, let me run it. Run server. I will be selecting my Tomcat. I will be going to next. Here we have what we need to run it, Java configuration. So I will be removing the Spring MVC. I will be using this. Finish. Okay. See, dispatcher, initialization started, web application context, refreshing web application context. I have already told you, right? 2 contexts it will be there, application context and a web application context. So that everything, if you check the logs, always try to do one thing whenever you are running a Spring MVC application. Nothing matters whether you have got an issue or not. You always try to see the logs very minutely. It will help you understand how Spring Framework works internally. See, if you see here, application context also got created, and now web application context got created. It is registering all the annotated classes. It is saying everything, which in our case, which is Spring config, right, which was annotated with @configuration. So always try to look into it. It will help you. Okay. Now what we'll do is we'll be using this URL pattern. Similar way, it is giving you that. Because it is right now pointing to the root context, root application. So no request or no URL you have given here, so that it will be redirect to it. Right? It has given me welcome file to Spring. That's all for today. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you like this video, please do like, share and subscribe to my channel. It means a lot to me. I'll be catching up with you guys in my next video. Till then, keep learning with Proy.